It's that time again. The new year's approaching and all the guys are saying how they will do XYZ in 2026. As if the 2025 version has suddenly become outdated. The fuck is this, EA? Now coding hasn't escaped this, but I have never done a video like this, so I'm exempt from the rule. Here's how I would learn Python in 2026 if I had to start over again. Well, first let's set some expectations, yeah? Learning a whole new language in a year is no easy feat, and unless your surname's Yang, you will not learn a programming language in that time. But you will be okay at it and even know enough for some real world applications, if you're consistent. Second, we have to sort this quagmire of courses before we even begin to talk about actually studying. Again, I'm exempt because I never did any of it. But assuming you're learning by yourself and not part of some university or whatever, you will need a neat little YouTube tutorial and not some online course, especially not a paid online course. You can get the same information by watching a 5-hour video, and unless the provider is something like Free Code Camp, they're just not worth the weight in gold. But I would only use Free Code Camp or other credible courses towards the middle to end of the year for the certifications. I just don't find them as helpful as YouTube and practice. As I've said earlier, I myself don't have a Python tutorial series in the typical sense, but don't worry, I will self-advertise later on in the video. I personally found this channel called Bro Code helpful when I started out. Since then, he actually remastered his Python course, and for more specific things related to Python, say a certain function or objects even, I found Tech with Tim and Python Simplified. They often came in clutch. Though I have to say, with them two, I do prefer the older content over the newer ones. You won't even know they did Python if you looked on the channel, but Sokrakitika, I butchered that name, also did Python stuff if you're looking for extra help for like very specific methods or functions. I personally found it quite useful. At the end of the day though, if a channel has a full Python tutorial, they're probably just going to be as useful as the next one. So just pick one you just vibe with more and it should be good enough. Now, unless you're a dinosaur, you might have forgotten another option to self-studying. Back in the ancient times, people used to read books. So if you are one of them, I'd say Python Programming for Beginners, the ultimate guide for beginners. But I cannot recommend books in general. It might just be preference, but for self-studying programming specifically, I just don't think they're a good option. Not that books aren't good for self-studying in general, but just for coding and that kind of areas very specifically. And only if you're doing self-study and not, somebody's not teaching you and they use the book as a guide. If you watched some programming videos before this one, you might be also wondering, how might you use the documentation to learn? You don't. You just don't. Not if you're a beginner.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
And I believe the people who glaze the documentation forget that, for dum-dums, this shit might as well be the hieroglyphics. Just before I actually get to the good stuff, don't use ChatGPT or Claude AI or whatever as a second brain. It should be used as a tool for learning purposes or even to understand a concept a bit better. You can use it if you're perpetually stuck, if there's a bit of your program that you just cannot figure out even after going YouTube or whatever. Sure, but if you use it for every little hurdle and if you just copy the code, you will not learn anything. When you first install Python, it's going to give you a nice little IDE, and just for the time being, it's perfectly suitable. Just load up your video of choice and just watch. If they're a good teacher, they should explain how things work and mess around with certain bits themselves, but often they won't go into too much depth into everything, which is a problem once you get past the basic if statements and what a variable is. So what you should do is follow along, copy what they do, see that it works, then tinker with it yourself. When you discover something new, and if you're still a bit confused, I'd say you can use ChatGPT or a book or any other secondary resource. But just jot it down somewhere so you can reference it in the future when you go back on it. That way you don't have to just dig through a whole bunch of videos or just try to find another resource to explain this one very niche thing. You have it all in a documentation somewhere. Here is just one example I use for my own thing. It's just stored on the basic Python IDE. I didn't bother writing it down, not for this anyways. and I didn't even bother getting up like a Word document or whatever. I just used the Python IDE. That way I can have a live example of what I'm talking about. If you are consistent with self-studying, no doubt you will get the very basics hammered in. I mean, things like if statements and basic string manipulation, you'll get that locked in basically from the get-go. Just a bit more advanced things, that's when you should write it down somewhere or mess around with it a bit more. Nothing fancy, but enough for your first project. Usually these YouTube courses will have dedicated bits where they go through something like Hangman or Bubble Sort even. Simple things that get you to use the basics of while loops and lists. And this is where I'm going to squeeze myself in, because these tutorials are some of the most...
It's the biggest piece of dog shit that I have ever heard.
The more you advance, the more blatantly obvious it becomes. The best way to learn programming is that once you got the basics, you create small projects as you learn more concepts. In fact, at a certain point, the projects will teach you the very concepts that you didn't even know that you didn't know existed. I wish when I started, I found someone who would actually teach instead of just showing the code and explaining it. Because there's a difference. Put it this way, when you're in school, teachers typically do something called scaffolding to get you across the zone of proximal development. Essentially, showing you and hopefully explaining as they do so. Then, they allow you to have a go with assistants, then have a go by yourself with peers, and hopefully by then you can do it by yourself independently. Obviously I'm oversimplifying the teaching process, but if you study psychology, you might know what I'm on about. It's very similar with programming. When you're doing a project, especially when you get onto like an advanced beginner and beyond, you just cannot copy the code. It's effectively the same as copying ChatGPT. What you should do is watch how the person plans the project. If they don't plan it well, or even worse, if they don't show you any plan, then either the project is very basic or they care more about views than actually teaching. But after the plan, think about what you could be doing next and using the video as a guide. The person gets you to the next step and hopefully teaches something, at which point you pause and have a go for yourself, see what you can do. What basically no one does is give you hints for the next steps should you not know what to do. Things like mentioning a method that you might not even know exists, or giving worded pseudocode before teaching you how to do it rather than explaining what they're doing. On your part though, if there's something in the tutorial that you just don't get, you have to do research yourself. This might be watching a video on that method, from a different channel or the same one maybe, or if you prefer it and understand it, reading a book or the documentation. I personally tried YouTube for asking ChatGPT about a method or a function. Note how I didn't say about the tutorial, because you don't want ChatGPT to create the code for you. You want it to tell you where you went wrong if you did go wrong, and explain a generic solution that you can then adapt into the project. I found that when it comes to tutorials, this channel Pixigami, I butchered it, he does things very well. So if there's a project video that I haven't made yet, or if you don't even like my stuff, his things are better than most slop out there. He actually teaches it very well. But why do you even need a video to make a project? Videos teach you the basics, even after you've been taught the subroutines, for loops, and a bit advanced such as dictionaries and frozen sets. Anyways, when you got the foundation locked in, I'd say make your own stuff independently of the videos. You can search up beginner to advanced projects as you see fit, but if you're struggling to find something, I recommend OCR, GCSE and A-level coding challenges. I did some videos on them and they do give a very clear specification on what the project should accomplish. And one last thing on projects. I would say that I should have understood what planning and pseudocode truly meant when I started for the first time. For smaller projects, you can easily get away with it with no plan and you just dive straight in. But when the scale builds up, spend a decent amount of time breaking it down. Understand its components and write a draft, or even draw a flow diagram if that's what you like. That way you can outline each component. Say you're making a health app, you would split apart things such as the inputs and exercises from the calculations, and for each bit briefly write out the logic the program would go through. That way when you're actually coding it, there's a bit of a specification that you can base it on. An integrated development environment is a fancy term for what platform you use to code. When you install Python, it should give you a default and basic IDE, though even things like a notepad can be considered one if you manage to run code from it. At some point though, you need to branch out. I wish I would have gotten over the confusing look of VS Code sooner, because it is very versatile and very popular. Yeah, it looks scary at first, especially when you see the terminal window when you likely never use command prompt to any meaningful degree. But understand, it's like with any new software, you're not going to understand it and it takes time getting used to. I'm sure there are videos dedicated to exploring it, but sometimes you get lucky and the coding tutorial gives you a brief explanation. In short, play around and understand what's actually happening when you do things like make a new folder or download the library, or when you eventually make a virtual environment. Here, ChatGPT is very helpful and use it to its fullest extent. What I wish I didn't do was use PyCharm so extensively. On the surface, it's great. It's very easy to navigate and very easy to understand. Using it is almost as easy as using the default IDE, but its features for the free tier is so limited that even making a CSV file won't work. And by using it, I never really understood what was happening behind the scenes as much as I did with VS Code, which is important when you get to the advanced stages. This isn't hate on PyCharm. I appreciate its high level approach and it certainly made coding seem less daunting, but I personally cannot recommend it over VS Code. At the very least, understand and try VS Code first, and then use PyCharm for smaller scale projects, which is what I've been doing. Other than practicing through projects, you should also do some programming challenges, like actual challenges, not one from OCR. Code Wars is definitely a really good one, and you can organize it based on how skilled you are and tune it to a genre such as algorithms, cybersecurity, bug fixing, and so on. And from the early section, remember, you can use AI to help you for these challenges, but do not get it to solve the problem. But that's effectively it. The initial part of learning Python is just understanding the basics of coding. From there, the answer isn't sexy. It's just projects and challenges, and from there, just researching what you come across. From here, it's more specific. In Python, you can do a range of things, which includes libraries and modules more complex than a simple import random. And for that, you will likely need to be comfortable with object-oriented programming. The tutorial will likely introduce this to you as normal, but it's definitely a jump up. If you have stopped taking notes, you might want to pick it up again, because it can be quite heavy to digest. But the process of learning is basically the same. Small steps and play around with it, see what works, see what doesn't. In your projects, make classes even if it's not 100% needed, just to get the practice in. I would say from now on, still use Code Wars or other similar things, but try Leet Code too. Yes, Leet Code. The same thing you grind till it's memory is what you should be using to learn. It's no more of a project than Code Wars is, so you will likely see the difference between the coding interview and actual code. But it will still teach you the concepts and having you practice different aspects for when you don't want the burden of a full-scale project. At the end of it all, you would want to branch out into your niche. Depending on what it is, you might want to learn it concurrently with Python, for example, HTML and CSS. When you've hit like an advanced beginner stage, for example, then I say you can learn that with Python. From here on out though, the full-scale tutorials aren't what they used to be. Everyone makes Python for beginners, but not everyone makes one for Panda. But that's okay. There will be at least one guide for niche developments. Either it be for backend with linking Python to SQL, or combining it with web development, or making games that aren't just 2D. Speaking of which, Pygame is a good module for 2D Python games. Yeah, I use it in my school project, it works pretty well. But whatever you do, don't fall in the trap of thinking it'll be like a cakewalk. Sure, you got Python fairly down, but this is effectively a new language you need to learn. And in the cases where you might want to learn SQL or JavaScript, it's literally a new language you need to learn. It's why I say begin to learn them from when you're at a good level with Python, the point where you can independently do your own projects. So to recap everything, before you start, set up your resources. Maybe watch bits of YouTube videos and search through channel lists to find one for you. And I say one because This is a beginner level where you're learning the same basic coding constructs. It's all gonna be the same shit. If you want books, then download them or get the actual physical copy to your liking. And remember, ChatGPT is a tool, not a second brain. And it's key to not end up in tutorial hell. That and proper note taking and personal experimentation. Literally just play around with the methods and functions. Don't just stick to the tutorials. When you got the basics, begin to create projects. At first, you will rely on tutorials. Hopefully, if they are nice, they actually teach you and not just talk about what they're doing. But at some point, you will be making your own projects. And just remember, plan it out. All the other stuff, the challenges, the poop, the advanced libraries, is all basically the same stuff, just with the difficulty dialed up. The learning process is much of the same, even when you start going into a bit more niche things. Like if you're going to combine Python with TypeScript is obviously a whole new language. You might want to start learning a bit of like HTML a bit early on. But just remember, it's a whole new thing. You have to start baby steps, just making a screen, for example. I hope this 2026 coding video was as helpful, if not more helpful than the others you might have seen. And be sure to comment if you think this video sucks ass or if you want to see a specific video about something. Now, just watching to the end helps a lot, but do consider liking the video as it boosts the channel a lot. Thank you.